thank you, Ms. Ben. We move now to the adoption of the agenda. Do I have any additions or?
Move the agenda.
I'd like to add one thing on unfinished business, return of deposits after 36 months of good pay. We talked about this once before. I just wanted to bring it back to again. Are there any other additions? If not, I have a motion.
I'll second.
Is that with addition? With addition, second? Thank you, please vote.
We need to hurry this meeting along. I gotta get down to Orlando for a rally tonight.
Okey dokey pokey. I'll do all I can do to help you. Is everybody's light yellow? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I missed the, it didn't. Oh, we didn't. What? I didn't see it come back. My screen's not on. Okay, I don't have a screen. Okay, and it 6 people voted, so something's wrong. Was I one that voted? Okay.
Okay, well.
Okay, first vote was 9-0. It passes 9-0, and I don't have a screen, so I'm gonna be peeking onto his. We move now to open forum. Do I have any speakers for today? Now his isn't working. That's what you get for being a good guy. All right, I'll look on with Dale, and you can look on with him. Okay, don't touch it. We move now to approval of the minutes on page 5.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. Please vote. They're testing me. And it passes 9-0. We move now to item F on page 15, extension of contract for fire hydrant and fire hydrant extension. Do I have a motion? It's an extension of contract.
Move the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Ben. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Chuck. Please, any questions, Dr. Walker?
I noticed in the list of CIP projects for the coming year that the funding of fire hydrants replacements was below the line, and I was curious about that because I think it's something we're obligated to do with other governmental bodies, specifically the county commission and the fire departments. And I just wondered why, would someone please explain why we're doing this, and at the same time the funding appears below the line?
Mr. Sorrell?
Yeah, I believe the Escambia County provides us with funding for this this particular item here. It's been on a competitive bid contract, but they provide us with the funding for this, and then the actual fire chiefs go out and tell us where they want the fire hydrants, and we replace them accordingly. The crew may have asked for additional fire hydrants to put in stock. I'm not sure about that one, but this is probably funded by the county.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Walker, is that it?
Thank you.
Good question. Ms. Benson?
When new subdivisions go in, as we expand,
Is this the obligation of the developer, or does the county continue to underwrite these?
It
Mr.
would
Sorrell?
be, I'm sorry, it would be the obligation of the developer. They have to put in everything as part of the subdivision.
That's what I thought. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, please vote. And it passes 9-0. We move now to item G on page 18, award a bid of chemical contract for sodium hypochlorite. Do I have a motion?
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Ms. Ritz?
I second.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? If not, please vote. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, Ms. Benson. Back it up.
For a while, we were seeing decreases in cost of chemicals. Are there any trends now? Because we sure use a lot of chemicals in our business. What's going on with the pricing?
Great question. Mr. Sorrell?
I think we're seeing a general increase across the board in chemicals. One particular case, I think we had a reduction in cost recently, but generally it's been an increase. I mean, some of them are sizable also, some of them 13, 15% increases, and you know, we competitively bid it. There isn't much we can do about it, especially for this hypochlorite, and we have to have it for disinfection. So basically, we're going to see an increase, I think, across the board.
And to follow up, if I may,
Yes,
Madam
please
Chairman. We were seeing that some companies from abroad or other places were bidding but not providing the quality that we were hoping to find. Has that changed? Are we finding new sources from it for some of these chemicals?
Yeah, we found domestic suppliers of the chemicals that we had concerns with. Most of those were involved with the water production system, and we were afraid to accept chemicals because of the quality conditions associated with anything coming in from China. So we've not been accepting those. So what we've been doing is buying domestic products that meet all of our qualifications.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the good question. Randy Ponson?
I've noticed that these commodities are going up, and the fact that they stayed the same with the increases of transportation costs means the commodities are really dropping. And you know, I think we need to be real careful with the budget heading forward. We're seeing transportation costs in our business through the roof, and even if the commodities stay stable, the transportation is going to go up a lot. We need to be with all of these different chemicals, we probably need to be noticing or at least budgeting for some increases. And the other question I had was, and I know that y'all look at this, but is there any specific technology out there that y'all would like that would maybe decrease some of this? I mean, is there something that would be on somebody's wish list that says, you know, if we put all these UV things in here, we wouldn't need as much sodium chloride is there stuff out there?
Good question, Mr. Sorrell.
There's also other products we can use, but when you start looking at the cost, they're sometimes prohibitive. For example, the ultraviolet disinfection that we use at Biomarcus, it's a great disinfection product. It doesn't kill the bacteria, but it sterilizes it, and it's been very effective. And technology's changed a great deal there recently. Used to be when the disinfection system would deactivate, it wouldn't come back on for 20 minutes. So that was a real problem. But with the new system we just installed at Biomarcus, I mean, we just finished a few months ago. That's not the case. It's an active system, but it cost, I forget how many millions of dollars to put that in. We've also tried our own production of what I'll call the bleach material, and that worked well, but you get into all kinds of problems with production and corrosion and hazardous materials. So basically what we found is this is the best way at this time to do it, and we just don't have a better solution, particularly one that's less expensive.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Great questions, by the way, today. If not, please vote. And it passes 9-0. We move now to item H on page 20, which is extension of chemical contracts for aluminum sulfate or liquid aluminum. Do I have a motion?
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Ben. Any comments? Questions? If not, please vote. And it passes 9-0. We move now to item I, page 22, with the budget. Mr. Sorrell.
Yes, ma'am. After all of the budget hearings that we had, and you know, all the arduous presentations that were presented to you, appreciate your indulgence in those. It took a lot of hours and a lot of extra hours for each of you to listen. And essentially, what you're seeing here in front of you is a summary of the budget with virtually everything that was presented to you previously. What we're recommending here to finalize these budgets in the water and wastewater budget is a rate increase approximately equal to the consumer price index, which is 2.3%, and essentially matches the increase in the operating costs that we experienced. We're not proposing any new debt. We're proposing paying for the capital improvement program, which is about $30 million. I think it's $30,390,000 worth with cash. Last year we did a very similar thing. We don't want to issue any more debt unless we have to. The increases somewhat uncontrollable. One of them was a major increase from the state of Florida retirement system. They increased their costs, I think it was 2.some%. I forget what it was, but they automatically increased their costs, and they've been doing that for almost every year. It's really to cover their increase in costs, and so that's just passed along to us. We did not have an increase in health care this year. And that was really unusual because we anticipated one, and that really helped to control the cost for us. The only thing new in this budget are the 2 utility billing persons that are going to work in finance. And as explained in the budget hearings, these people will be monitoring the billings that are going out. They'll look at every single major billing so to try to keep from having any bills that go out that are inappropriate. We have what I'll call flags or warnings on our system, on our readings, but sometimes those get missed. So the individual eyes on those accounts should help us to reduce that. They'll need a new truck, so that's included in here. There's a new mini excavator for maintenance and construction. Basically, that's for the lift stations. Anytime they do major repairs of the lift stations, they have to dig. And these mini excavators we found are just extremely important and just expedite the work for a reasonable value. We're going to have to do some additional testing for our water reclamation people at our plants for both the primary and secondary inorganic levels. We don't have any choice. We're being forced to do that by DEP. And there's one additional vehicle, I think, included here for the sampling equipment that's needed to do that. And then there's a compact excavator for the Regional Services Department. Again, what Regional Services does is they maintain the underground infrastructure. And if they have an excavator, it keeps us from having to do the hand digging. In many cases, it expedites the work because they're extremely busy. We're again recommending $1.5 million in the operating contingency. What really Patty and Justin and I have decided to do here is to put this money in a separate line item instead of putting it out in the individual departments. That way anybody that wants to use it's got to ask. And unless they have a good reason, we don't allow that to be used, and it's been very successful. But it also allows us, in case of emergencies, in case we have to do something that's unexpected, it allows us a cash reserve that we can use. So the $30 million capital improvement project list is included. $8 million of that's going to I&I. Let me see what else. There's several other major projects in there too that are probably important to you. Airway Stockdale, those were approved by the board for the new sewer work, and the engineering is almost done, so this is the actual construction phase. The same way with Navy Point, this is Navy Point Phase 4. This is the actual construction. Generator replacements, we have found that these emergency generators are the most valuable tool that we have when there isn't any power available due to hurricanes or major storms. So Jerry Piscopo and his group are are keeping the generators in place. We probably have over 100 now that we use, and we use them on roving generators and a lot of other things. We have them at many of the water wells and some of the major lift stations. In addition to, we actually pull those around to service the lift stations. Essentially what that means, when power goes out at time of emergency, the lift stations don't work. That's the pump stations for all the wastewater, they don't work. We have almost 400 lift stations. So what we do is we have roving generators now. And we'll actually have a crew that'll be assigned to a certain area, and they'll pull a generator down to each location, and they'll pump down that lift station, and then they'll move to the next lift station and pump it down. And essentially what that means is, to the people who are using the wastewater system, they don't know the difference. But from our perspective, it keeps the system flowing and keeps it from overflowing, so it helps tremendously. And it's just kind of a creative way of being able to make the system work without having to experience putting generators at every single lift station, because I don't think we could afford that. The IT master plan's in here, the Michigan Avenue transmission main extension. Remember last year and the year before, we put in the big water tank in Carriage Hills, and that was done so that we could improve the water quantity and the pressure in the Carriage Hills area. But what we have to do in order to accommodate that is we got to improve the water main along Michigan in order to provide all those areas. This budget provides for that. We got another $1 million, 1.2 million I think it is, for the water meter replacement. If you remember, 10 years ago we changed out all the meters, and they're starting to wear out now. So what we're doing is replacing the MIUs, the information units on the particular units, instead of changing out the whole meter. So there's over $1 million for that. Detroit Boulevard, the board's well aware of the situation there. That's where all of the major development is taking place out in the western part of the county. Some of the ECOA systems are old and need to be upgraded, not just because of the development, because it's just old and needs to be upgraded. So we're in the process of going to do a project there. The Ellison Garage expansion over here, and the reason for that is we've got to upgrade it so that it's compatible with natural gas. There are certain legal requirements if you can work on a truck that has natural gas, because it elevates and it'll store actually in the top of the building, and it's highly explosive, so you have to be able to vent that. So our buildings are going to have to be changed in order to accommodate that. So essentially that's the water and wastewater budget. Very minor increase. They give the staff a great deal of credit for being able to control the costs, and the control of the healthcare costs really helped this year, because we've had some major increases there. So it's just a 2.3% increase, almost the same as the CPI. So it's probably something that's very presentable. We expect to have, we hope to have anyway, about $24 million in carryover. And if we do, that'll carry into next year's capital improvement program, so we'll see. The sanitation and materials recycling facility is the second budget. It's a little different there. We've experienced some major cost increases in just operating in the sanitation system. It's 5.3%, so it's been a big issue. We have not added any new positions, so that's not the issue here. But we've got to buy new trucks, as you know. We've got to buy new cans, as you know. We're buying routeware, as you know, so it's a pretty big operation. But where we're having the problem is not so much in the collection side as in the materials recycling facility. The average material value, the AMV, has dropped through the floor. It's dropped to historical lows, and essentially the MRF is not paying for itself. So we've got to find a way to make it pay for itself, or to make it, from an accounting perspective, be in the black. And we figured out a way here with the great work here from Patty and Justin, to where we're recommending a 5% rate increase in the Escambia County sanitation collection system. They basically have not been charged anything for recycling for 3 years. So we're recommending that the 5% rate increase be applied to them. It's only $1.06 per month. 5% sounds like a big number, but it's a very small amount when it comes to the dollars and cents. And then we'll make a transfer from that fund into the materials recycling facility in order to keep it in operation. And then another option is you can close it down. But if you close down the MRF, you got to pay $9.8 million in debt fees, which we don't have. So that's not a good operation. So we're working on a lot of different new technology there, and I really don't have any room to wiggle on that 5%. You know, it was suggested that we use 7.5% and then negotiate it down with the board, but I've selected not to do that. And it's my job to be straightforward and honest with you, and I'm telling you, 5% is what's needed if you want to keep the MRF open, and I have very little room to wiggle. If you cut that, you're gonna have to cut something like the route wear, the cans, the trucks, something else, because there just isn't any wiggle room in that 5%. The good thing is it's only $1.06, so it's very minimal fee. But what that'll do with that transfer is that'll allow us to charge the Escambia County systems, or residents who have been getting recycling free, basically it'll be an accounting wash, but it'll be essentially a fee, and we'll transfer that money through and pay for the MRF operation. You know, it's been 3 years now, and the MRF is just, I wouldn't say it's struggling because it's doing very well, but the cost for the material that we used to be able to sell and to pay for the operation, I mean, they've gone to record lows. I mean, I remember when we were doing this, we were getting $120 per ton for the average material value. That material value now is about $50 a ton. And I'm not sure that it's going to go any higher for a while. It's all because of the international trade wars that are going on. The domestic markets are saturated with mixed paper, some cardboard, and glass, and we are having trouble disposing of those, and we're trying some new technology right now, which if you want me to, I can explain at some point what's going on. Even today, we're actually working on it to try to dispose of that material without having to put it in the landfill. If we take those tonnage and put it in the landfill, it's about $46 a ton. Very expensive, and it's not, there isn't any funds for that. So we're looking at a way to try to dispose of those materials and use the byproduct in either our compost operation or some nitrogen reduction operation for the landfill leachate, but we're not sure which way yet. So the bottom line is, in order to make the MRF solvent, we need to increase the rates by 5% in Escambia and transfer that money back over into the MRF, and it'll keep both operations in the black for a minimal fee. Now with the Santa Rosa, there isn't any changes needed there because the Santa Rosa basically is an independent system. It pays for itself, and there is a small profit margin there that we make on that. Now the capital funding that's required, or we're recommending for the MRF, you know, we get $400,000 in storage, and we get some new process equipment modifications, and that's some of the optical sorters and something for the glass and some other things. The glass right now is what I'll call dirty glass. It has a lot of impurities with it, and when it's that impure or has that many contaminants, it's hard to get rid of that material because the fiberglass manufacturers don't want it. So we're looking at ways now of cleaning that up. One way is we took the glass and put it in a big storage facility, and we floated it, and we got the materials off, and we're trying to see now if that material is clean enough that we can sell it. We're also going to put it in the incinerator, and we're going to see if we can combust those impurities. We're not sure if that'll work, but we're going to try. And that's all ongoing as we speak. I mentioned to you about the incineration. We've got a large incinerator at the MRF right now. It came in, started up yesterday. It weighs 90,000 pounds, so it's huge. Came in on a truck 90 feet long on a special transport. So to give you some idea, and we fired it up this morning, and as of before lunch, we'd already burned 30 tons of materials, and we ended up with a pile of like charcoal about as big as the front of this desk from here to here. So it's over a 90% reduction in volume and weight. So if we decide to put that in material in the landfill, it'll be inexpensive. We decide to use it in compost, it is compostable. There is a market for it at a 7% ratio. We also talked to the county landfill people this morning. We are going to try to put some of that material in like a dumpster and run the leachate through it to try to take out the high nitrogen that's given us problems at Biomarcus. It's just an experimental thing, so you can see we're out there on the leading edge again trying to figure out ways to economically dispose of some of these materials, because right now you can't give mixed paper away. Some cardboard's not being accepted, and we've got I think we've got 600 tons of mixed paper right now on store. And by the end of, probably the end of this week, we won't have any, the way it looks, if the machine works like they say it's going to. But right now, it cooks anything you put in there at 2,500 degrees. And it's kind of a unique machine. It costs $630,000 if you want to buy one. We might be able to do it on a lease purchase. But it's kind of a unique machine, because when you take and put the material in there, you light it with some sort of a combustible material, and you stand back and turn the big diesel generators on, and they blow air in there at a real high volume, and it's like a big convection oven. And it'll burn virtually anything you put in there up to 2,500 degrees. You know, you're welcome to view it at the landfill. It looks like an oversized dumpster on tracks, but it's a heavy-duty oversized dumpster on tracks. And they're out there today. Randy's out there and Jerry Piscopo are both out there, and I got some pictures of the equipment and some of the product that comes out of it if you want to see it later. But basically, that's what we're doing. So the bottom line is we need 2.3 in water and wastewater, which is $1.43 a month for water and wastewater for a normal residential customer. We need 5% in the sanitation system, and that's $1.06 a month for anybody in the Escambia County system. And if you pass those numbers, we should have sufficient funds to be able to operate next year, particularly in the MRF, as long as the material values don't continue to decline and go much lower. We're not sure what's going to happen in that market, but right now it doesn't look like that's going to happen. It looks like it's going to stabilize, but we'll see. You know, I don't think any of us can predict exactly what's going to happen because of the international trade wars that are going on. But overall, I compliment our staff and the finance department for putting this together. This one took some creative work and some creative accounting in order to figure out a way to balance the MRF, and I think we've done that very reasonably for a very low cost. And if we do these, it should solve most of the problems and give the staff the money they need to operate water, wastewater, and sanitation. And that's the end, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Benson?
I have several questions. But first of all, having the departments come and present their individual budgets and allow us to ask questions makes this so much easier. And so I want to thank all of the staff who did that, because I think we come into this process well informed about that. But I just have a few questions. Just from a nomenclature point of view, do we consider operating contingency, carry forward, and reserves as synonymous?
Patty, do you
I
want
can answer it if you don't want to answer it, Patty. No, we do not consider
Okay.
them synonymous.
Tell me the difference, if you will.
Patty, I'm gonna let you do that, and I keep stealing your thunder, and I don't want to do that.
Good afternoon. Okay, so operating contingency is a budgeted line item, and if we don't need to use it, then whatever is left over just falls into the bottom line. So if we don't use it, that helps our carry forward because we have more to carry forward. If we have to use it, then we don't have to dip into other reserves. We've got it already budgeted as a line item, and then we can use it if we need to.
Okay, and I made that assumption. So how does that differ from our reserves?
The reserves is a restricted reserves, and what we have at the end of the year to carry forward, we use as a capital source for the next year. So that's when I calculate, when we calculate what we can afford to pay for capital, with just what we have on hand and not have to borrow anything, then we use those carry forwards to pay for capital, not for the operating.
And if I...
Yes, please do.
So when we have audits, they typically talk to us about the level of our reserves and the adequacy. And I know I'm asking Dr. Walker's question because he has always been so, has stressed the importance of reserves. How do we stand on reserves? Are we good?
Our reserves are good. We calculate for restricted reserves for operating type contingencies, not counting the 1.5. We always put in the 3.5 million for operating reserves, and then the remainder reserves is what's calculated as carry forward for capital, like I said. But our in water fund, our reserves are good, and we want to show good reserves because that helps us if we ever have to go into the debt market for a loan or a bond, because that shows that if we have healthy reserves, then it shows that we have the capacity to repay our debt.
Right. And of course, there's that fine line. We don't want reserves that are so robust that we're, having to raise rates to our customers. So, but it sounds like we're fairly healthy, but not.
Right. And Mr. Sorrell wanted me to point out that in sanitation, however, that's another story, because we have had increased costs there. So we don't have the reserves, and it's not something that happened overnight. It's been happening, for ever since, at least since the flood event as well, because we had to use a lot of reserves to pick up the debris. But the 5% increase that we're requesting this year, in addition to paying for increased costs in sanitation and the transfer to the MRF, we're hoping that we'll be able to start building up some more reserves in sanitation and get that back into the positive.
And if,
Yes, ma'am, please do.
If I can move to some of the sanitation questions, and first of all, I think the people of this community have shown again and again that they are committed to recycling. The last thing we want to do is to shut down that operation. We want to make this work because we believe in it. How does this proposed rate compare to the city of Pensacola's rates?
I don't have that information.
I think we're going to be about $4 a month cheaper than the city of Pensacola.
I think that's important for us to remember.
It is.
In that regard, and I think our services are greater than theirs. I mean, in quantity, not to mention, well. So I noticed that we have garbage trucks budgeted. Didn't we do that last year in the budget? We talked about the cost up front for garbage trucks and how long it took from the time we paid for them to get them. So, but we're doing it again? Help me understand that.
Well, we were proposing a 5-year plan to purchase 10 trucks a year with a lease purchase type arrangement. And so I think this will be year 3 of that capital financing plan to start replacing those trucks on a more systematic method, rather than trying to just buy them all at the same time like we did before. Because when you buy them all at the same time, then they all start breaking down or needing more maintenance at the same time.
And that's happened to us. Yes.
Right.
I had forgotten that. So we will see this again next year. Just 2 more questions. Our composting operation, which has been so successful, is that a net neutral, or are we actually gaining revenues from that? How does that impact our budget?
Do you want me to? You go ahead.
Compost operation is more of a cost avoidance than it is a revenue generator. Certainly, we're producing about 2,000 tons a month and selling every bit of it, but it's relatively inexpensive to buy. So the biggest savings there is the cost avoidance associated with not having to dry the materials and so on. It's probably around $600,000 for the cost avoidance and another $250,000 for just maintenance on the dryer. So it's somewhere around $1 million a year in cost avoidance, and then it is bringing in a small revenue stream. I'm not quite sure what that is, but it's relatively small. So bottom line, it's a very good operation. We're selling everything we make, and it's avoiding huge costs associated with gas consumption and the drying and the maintenance on the dryers themselves, ma'am.
Well, and we might contemplate increasing those prices. I think we are marketing it fairly low. I mean, we ought to act like capitalists when we can, just a thought. All right, the last question is, I didn't see anything budgeted for a new transfer station for sanitation. If we succeed in getting the county to agree to that, which is so important for operations, will that be in next year's budget?
We have $300,000 in the sanitation CIP budget for the engineering design of
Okay.
that. The construction won't happen next year,
Okay.
so we didn't put that in the budget.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great questions. Is that it, Ms. Benson?
That's all, thank you.
Mr. Kimball?
So I had a question, about the MRF and the incinerating of the stuff. Is that, I didn't see that in here. Is that already something, the equipment, you mentioned it was a pretty high dollar item.
We have a beta or a trial project ongoing right now. It's for 2 weeks. And the cost for 2 weeks was $49,700, I believe, for 2 weeks' use of this new machine. That's not the procurement. We want to see if it'll work and what the production rate is, the burn rate and so on, and what kind of materials it'll actually incinerate. So we're trying it for 2 weeks, and at some point we'll decide if we want to do that. But what I try to look at is the amount of paper and the amount of other materials we have on hand that we'd have to landfill, and then consider those costs and compare those to what the cost of an incinerator will be. Certainly, we don't have $600,000 worth of paper to incinerate in 1 year, but over multiple years, we will. But then we have to look at what's the paper industry going to do 5 years out. You know, if the paper market goes back up to where it's sky-high price, we don't want to incinerate it. So we've got a lot of things to look at, but the first thing we have to do is a trial to see if it works, what the incineration rate is, and if we can use the byproduct.
No, keep going.
So with that, I'm just curious. It sounds like one of those things I could see there being groups or people. Like, is there any kind of, from the fumes that come off of that, is there any kind of backlash of stuff that comes with that?
Well, actually, that's a really good question, because we called DEP and asked them for a permit. And they said, you don't need one because it's a trial. And they said, but we want to come and watch it and we'll see it work, because where Hurricane Michael hit, if this thing works, we want one over there. So right now, it doesn't need a permit. It probably would ultimately. I've got some pictures I can show you, but it's operating right now, and there aren't any fumes or any smoke at all coming off the machine. It all generates back through, from what I understand. And it essentially burns up everything, and the air quality is just not a problem with this particular unit.
Awesome. That's all.
Ms. Ben? Good question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And really, this is probably just for clarification. The difference between FY 2020's projected carry forward reserves estimate 16.8 million, and then the end FY 2019's 24 million. So this 2020 is what we're projecting for the end of the 2020 budget year, the 24.8. That's my question.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay, so that basically 7 million more difference. I mean, we'll have 7 million more approximately the end of this fiscal.
At the end of this fiscal
This
year,
fiscal year.
yes, ma'am, and then that will be a source for the capital in 2020.
Okay, so that's part of this, why we're not going to have to use debt and so forth.
Right, that's right.
Excellent. And by the way, I commend the staff for putting this together the last 2 months. All the department presentations have been excellent information for us to utilize and understand, and the amount of work put into that, I very much appreciate it. Thank you all for your efforts.
Thank you.
And one more question on the contingency
Okay.
before I let you go. It's 1.5 million in the operating contingency. Has that number been the same for a number of years now?
It has. It's just kind of an estimate we made several years ago, and it's worked out well, so we've just continued to use that.
See no need to adjust that. Okay,
Right.
thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Dr. Walker?
Madam Chairman, I'm in a sort of a quandary. I have probably numerous comments and questions that I'd like to make going through this whole thing. I wonder if one way to do it might be to just go here on the budget message paragraph by paragraph and let everyone who wants to comment on each paragraph, or I can just go through the whole thing myself while everybody else sits there and keeps their mouth shut. And then they get their turn. How should we do this?
I think we'll just let you roll, and maybe you'll answer a lot of questions that other people have. I find that happens to me sometimes. Unless you would like to let the CAC members go first, and then you wind us down.
That would be fine with me.
Mine will be quick.
Okay, we'll do that then.
Okay.
Ms. Schneider?
I would like to know exactly what you're incinerating, and I have a couple questions. What is the source of power that you're using to incinerate it? And what is the cost to use the incinerator per pound?
Thank you,
Or
Mr.
however.
Sora.
Well, you had several questions. The first one was, what are we incinerating? Mixed paper is the primary item. but there are large logs, large tree stumps that are out at the landfill that need to be incinerated, and they're huge. So we have a hydraulic splitter, and we'll split those and we'll incinerate those. We already incinerated a bunch of them this morning. So there'll be those things. So mostly mixed paper, some cardboard, logs, big logs, tree stumps. Then you ask me, what's the power source? Well, there isn't one. Basically what you do is you put the materials in here, you close it up, you put an accelerant in it, and you light it. And then you turn the diesel generators on, so the power source, I guess, would be a diesel generator with diesel. And it blows air in there at a high rate, and essentially it creates like a huge convection oven, and it burns at a real high rate. And all it is just air being blown in there, and that's it. And then there's a screw auger at the bottom that takes the materials out as they burn, and you just add more as you go.
Thank you. Ms. Ritz?
Thank you. Where is this housed, and does it need a special enclosure over time if it does prove workable?
Good question. Mr. Sorrell?
It's currently at the landfill, adjacent to the materials recycling facility. It does not need anything. It's on tracks, and you can move it around if you want. It's big and it's heavy, but it's on not tractor trailer, but bulldozer tracks. And you can just move it around. When they took it off the trailer, they drove it off the trailer and backed it down and set it there, put a water hose on it, and we fired it up today, and it's been working ever since. So you can move it about wherever you want, except it's heavy.
One more question.
Yes, ma'am.
Really, probably two. Would this be of value to any other groups who they don't use the sanitation recycling, but would like to have their products burnt? Or
It's a little bit premature for me to answer that. I'm not sure I know. Until we get to use this thing for a week or two, I'm not really sure how good it's going to be or how well it's going to burn. As of this morning, for a few hours, it looks like it's going to burn just about anything you put in there, but I don't know yet. But yes, I would say that if we would procure something like this for our use and it was economically feasible, we would probably make it available to the landfill and various other places. Because with a 90-some% reduction in volume and weight, it certainly would be valuable to the landfill for things like drywall. I mean, the county landfill does not want drywall, and I believe this will incinerate the material. There's other things that they don't want C&D, construction and demolition materials, in the landfill. This will incinerate them in nothing flat, I think.
that's what I was.
So it's very possible, and the landfill people are there watching it today along with our staff.
Thank you.
And lastly,
No, keep going. I love your questions.
one more. Not all Escambia County citizens utilize the recycling, sad to say. So how will they view the 5% increase? And secondly, the second part, how will it be worded on the bill?
Thank you. Mr. Sorrell?
It's not going to be worded for recycling. It's going to be worded simply as part of the sanitation fee for Escambia County. Right now, the people using that service, I think, is between 75% and 80%, so it's pretty high. But basically, it'll just be an increase in sanitation rate.
Thank you. Mr. Ponson?
So, about the fuel to that, are you saying that this incinerator uses what you're burning as the fuel to burn itself?
Yes, that's correct, with air injection, or air injection, not induction. High volume air injection. Randy, you probably ought to come out there and see it. A guy with your kind of knowledge, you'd want to see this thing work. But that's all it is. When we first looked at it, a couple of our people said, well, what's the fuel source? Like Puchel. Doesn't need one. It basically is its own fuel source. The more you put in it, the more it'll burn.
Thank you. Mr. Kimball?
Sorry, I realized I had one other question, but I thought of another one about this. Could we, with the sorting capability at the MRF, with something like this, could we potentially add other things that we currently don't accept recyclables, like say styrofoam things, then sort those out and incinerate them, or is that? I'm just thinking of, again, less things that we would have to.
Landfill.
Yeah.
Again, it's a little premature for me to answer. I'm not quite sure, but I don't know what it would do with plastics and styrofoam. I gotta believe that it would burn just about anything you put in it. Now, it won't burn glass, but it'll burn the contaminants off of glass because it's not high enough to burn the glass or melt the glass. But, you know, the big thing is like C&D materials. Right now, the landfill doesn't want that, and there isn't any place around Escambia County to take it. They would be thrilled to have a machine like this that they could run all these C&D materials through. So that's just one option. I
I was just thinking with environmentalist groups, they might like the idea that we could then take that styrofoam and incinerate it and not have to put it in the landfill. So just, so my other question that I had written down earlier was on the proposed CIP projects, and I know it's not in here because it's way down on the list, but that reclaimed water system expansion, I mean, I see that there's a funding anticipated by a grant. Is that, I mean, do we think that that's likely that we'll actually get that? And then my follow-up to that is how far out does that, because it's not in here, and I know it's because it's way down on the list. So where does that look to expand that to?
I think you're referring to the Pensacola Beach reclaimed water system.
Is it, okay, I don't know.
Yeah,
just-
that's what it is, and
Okay.
it looks like that is going to happen.
Okay.
We've received a $4.68 million grant from the FDEP for that, and it's not a matching grant, so it's their money. The problem is we've encountered one major, or one minor, I guess, hiccup in it. 10% of that money has to go to DEP for administrative charges, so that means they get $400 and some thousand to administer that money. Well, that's a large amount, and that really reduces the scope of the project. So they wanted us to borrow the extra $400,000 to finish the project, and I told them no. I told them we'll change the scope of the project to reduce the project scope instead of borrowing money, because it just doesn't make sense. You know, they took $400,000 for administrative charges, and then they want us to borrow money to make up the difference. And I just told them we're not going to do it. So that's still in limbo. We'll see where that goes. But basically, we're going to get the grant, and we'll see where it goes. But it's going to happen. It looks like, and it's going to involve Pensacola Beach.
Thank you, great questions. Mr. Perkins?
So we have operating contingencies of, you know, we have some carryover, a budget of 1.5 million. Now, what about project contingencies for the capital projects? Is that separate, and if so, what are we carrying over on that? What's that amount?
Mr. Sorrell?
The,
Well, I'm sorry,
sorry.
that's okay.
The project contingency carryover, which is what we're estimating to be at the end of fiscal 19, is the 24 million. And then at the end of 2020, we're estimating that to be about 13 million. So we'll use that project contingency again to fund the 2020 capital.
Is that it? Thank you. Okay, you're up, Dr. Walker.
Well, it's not even a campaign year, and I can't give a campaign speech. Okay. All right, beginning with the first paragraph of the budget message, the 2.3% rate increase for water and wastewater, I, for one, can live with that. I think that's a very reasonable increase. The fact is that we have had to increase our rates virtually every year that ECA has been in business, and this is a relatively small rate increase. So I, for one, am fine with that. It's nice to see that the capital improvement fee that we approved last year, that took courage from some members of the board to do this, and it was a big egg to swallow, but the board did it, and it's nice to see that money is helping us out now to the tune of $9 million to help pay for capital improvements. It's wonderful that we're going into a second year with no additional debt, no new debt. A question I have is, can we foresee, does staff foresee that we might have no new debt next year?
Mr. Sorrell?
That's the goal. It all depends on what happens this year and if we have the carryover amounts that we're estimating. You know, all the numbers that Patty's been mentioning to you are estimates, strictly estimates. if we get a hurricane or a major storm or something like that, or if we have major equipment breakdowns, it could use up that money. So I don't know how to answer that other than to tell you it's a goal. We're going to try for that. The capital improvement fee money has helped tremendously. About a third of that money is already gone because we use it for debt, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. But the other part is being used for capital improvements on a cash basis on an annual basis here. So it's been just tremendously helpful to us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Speaking of those carry-forward reserves and so forth that have already been the subject of several questions, especially by Mrs. Benz, there is a decline of $7 million in the number stated here in these pages in the amount of the carry-forward reserves from fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 20. It says on page 23 that we're going to have 24 million in carry-forward reserves at the beginning of fiscal year 20, or at the end of fiscal year 19. And then it says on page 22 that we're going to have we project say a $17 million carry-forward reserve at the end of fiscal year 20. That's a $7 million decline. And furthermore, we were just told that that staff is now projecting that the carry-forward reserve at the end of fiscal year 20 is going to be only $13 million. So that would be a $10 million decline or 11. That sounds pretty bad to me. Can staff make me feel any better about that?
That was good.
Okay. Well, I'll try. Okay, so you mentioned the 16.8 million on page 22. That is two components. The 3.5 million of unrestricted reserves or restricted reserves for operating is part of that. So the project contingency reserve is going to be the 12.9. So if we start out with 24 million with project contingencies from the end of this year, and then we add in about 6.3 million of the capital improvement fee, because part of that, as Mr. Sorrell mentioned, is already being used for some debt service. So we start out with about 30 million. Available for capital, and that's what we're projecting we're going to spend. So the fallout then is actually the 12.9 million for project contingencies. So we're using project contingency, and then we're replenishing project contingency based on what's left over from excess reserves and or any excess capital sources.
In the second paragraph on page 22, it is written that FY 2020's projected carry-forward reserves estimate is 16.8 million. Is that an incorrect?
No, that's 3.5 million for the operating reserves, and then the 12.9 million for the project reserves.
Okay. The 3.5 million for what we like to sometimes call emergency reserves?
Right, yes, sir. So that's the 16 million. 16.8 million.
Okay, so the 13 million is a different number really from the 16.8. It's 16.8 is 13 million plus 3.5 million of what I like to think of as emergency reserves.
Correct.
All right, thank you. Is the 16.8 million of carry-forward reserve estimate, is that down from the past or is it up?
It's actually higher than it has been in the past several years.
The reason I ask is because of a sentence in that same second paragraph which says, while in the past we've tried to be consistent with the amount of carry-forward reserves, this year we're going to have 16.8 million. But I don't know if that meant we were expecting less or expecting more than in the past, when we were trying to be consistent.
Well, the way we look at it is we try to be consistent and plan for approximately 9 million in carry forward. If we can't make the 9 million, then we have to look at an additional rate increase to try to be consistent on the carry forward. However, this year, the way the numbers came out with the 2.3%, we actually exceeded our goal of the 9 million carry forward.
Okay. As far as the carry forward reserve of, where it says $16.8 million, since $3.5 million of that is a kind of emergency reserve, then we really don't plan to spend that in the coming year,
Right.
right? Okay. At the bottom of page 22, 2 new utility billing positions. I'm glad to see that. I, for one, have, in the past year or so, have every now and then had a call from a constituent or a customer complaining because their bill was screwed up, the meter wasn't right, somebody didn't read the meter right, somebody in the staff didn't get a correction made in a timely fashion. So if apparently these 2 positions will directly help address those kinds of problems, and I think that's money well spent. Since we seem to have really sort of solved the problems or greatly reduced them in customer service, and so it's good to see that this seems to have risen up as a major problem, as the biggest problem, and we are in fact addressing it. Thank goodness we don't. Of course, my experience recently is that we don't have to worry about increasing the number of customer service reps again, or what in the world are we going to do about customer service? Seems to have sort of settled itself, and that's great. I also approve on page 23 of the $200,000 in the public information program. I know that that's always sort of a delicate subject, but I frankly think that that the public information program may save virtually a huge amount of money, especially in the customer service department and the sanitation department, because it does such a good job of informing customers about a lot of the basics. Now, another question about the operating contingency that's discussed in the 3rd paragraph on page 23. The operating contingency of 1.5 million. About how much, on the average over the last several years, how much of that do we carry forward?
We generally are able to carry forward between 800,000 and $1 million.
Between 800 and $1 million? Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah. So, in effect, that's another built-in cushion.
Correct.
Yeah, and understand, if we get a storm, that money will be gone, because that's where we'll go to get it.
And the emergency reserve too, perhaps. Yeah, but it's good. Turning the page. I'm skipping over some of the things, but no new positions in sanitation. That's an accomplishment, I think, for Mr. Rudd and Mr. Riles and Kiles, and proud to see that. I appreciate them holding it down like that. Okay.
Can I jump in on this paragraph for a quick question?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
It says our debt service coverage is going to remain acceptable this year. Do we know the number?
Patty?
Yes. For the water fund, when you're looking at just the parity debt, it's 1.76 compared to the 1.25 requirement. And for all the debt combined, it's 1.43 compared to the 1.15 required. That's for the water fund.
Good question.
Good question.
And I can remember years when it was 1.26. And staff the budget people may have been fudging to get us to that, but it's nice to be comfortably higher than that. How much of the proposed 5% rate increase for the Escambia County sanitation system, how much of that will be allocated to the MRF?
We're estimating 1.8 million.
1.8 million out of how many million? What's the total expected from the 5% increase?
The 5% increase is about 1.4 million, but we have some debt service savings because the original CNG vehicle lease was paid off this year, so we don't have as high a debt service next year in sanitation. So with the rate increase and a combination of the rate increase and the debt service savings, that's how we're able to accommodate that.
It sounds like virtually all of it, just about.
Yeah,
All of it?
100% more.
Is it fair to say all of the 5% rate increase will?
Well, I wouldn't say all of it because there are some increased operating costs in sanitation as well. So we're able to cover those increased costs for operating and the debt service savings, which is about 1.8 million, 1.4 million, because we have some new debt service if we do the lease again in 2020. So when you look at the net effect, I wouldn't say all of the 5% is going for the MRF. It's still having to cover the increased costs in sanitation itself.
Okay. There is obviously another alternative for increasing revenue of the MRF, and that would be to charge the 13 customers that we have using the MRF more. But Mr. Sorrell has explained to me that it's that would probably cause quite a few of them to end their recycling, and just because it would be cheaper for them to dump it in their landfills. So I see why we're doing what we're doing, and it's not really a pretty picture, but that's the name of the recycling market these days, I guess. Let me see what else I got. Could we charge more for compost in order to get some revenue that would help with the sanitation system rates?
Thank you. Mr. Sorrell, I think, can answer that.
You know, that's one that I'm going to have looked at in great detail. I'm kind of concerned about that. There's another one where there's a certain break point where you can't overcharge or you're not going to be able to sell it. Right now, our big issue is we have to sell the material because otherwise we have to go back to spend the materials for drying, buying the gas, and doing the maintenance and so on. So it's an issue for us. We have to get rid of it, so we have to find a breaking point. And that's what we've done initially. But what I can do is we can have that looked at and see if there is a rate that's acceptable, that people will still buy it. I don't know what that is, but I can tell you I don't think it's a whole lot more than what we're charging. Because for us, it's a situation where if we charge too much and we can't get rid of it, I don't know what we're going to do with it. I don't know if we can burn that like we're burning everything else, but that's probably what we have to try to do, because we just have to have a market to get rid of it in order to save the money on the operating side.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, moving on page 30, we have a project number and $5,400,000 this year for basically it says for sewer expansion. then I note that Stockdale and the Navy Point Phase 4 add up to 4.25 million. So that leaves there's a difference there of $1.15 million.
If you look over on page 29, I think you'll find that Nature Trail and River Gardens is on that page, which is not on
And
the
they
top.
add up to 1.15.
right. And Lane is in my district, and the gentleman that was requesting that walked the subdivision with me, and the neighbors are not willing to tie in, so we won't be moving forward with that one. He did find another way to tie in on Pine Forest, I believe,
We won't be moving forward with
himself, so we won't be moving forward with that one. I believe, Mr. Perkins can, and I was
Yeah,
gonna.
the River Gardens project, they're surveying their homeowners
Yeah.
right now to see if they want to tie in or not. And so that may be a similar issue where they do not want to, but I would, I would like us to see, if they do want to, I'd like to see us at least have some engineering money or something, an initial phase 1 or something to try and get funded. And I have areas I might look at cutting, but there might be some other way to do it, but it may not be an issue, but it may.
Thank you.
Well, I was about to say that I presume that 1.150
Was available.
million was a leftover that could be used for the septic tank abatement program, but you just told me it can't. So,
Well, 150,000 can.
would be. Is there any money in the budget anywhere for, under any subterfuge title for the septic tank
Well,
abatement program?
That's what the River Gardens project
So,
is,
yeah.
septic tank abatement. There are septic tanks in there they're trying to get off of because
No, the septic tank abatement program is where we subsidize a connection to a new subdivision or something. When the cost exceeds a certain amount, and we offer to subsidize it, rather than give them permission to put a new subdivision on septic tanks. It doesn't apply to old neighborhoods, only to new ones.
New ones.
I think Mr. Sorrell would endorse that, would say that that's true. So do we have, and that's been a program that has helped us to keep from having new septic tanks being put into the south end of Escambia County, even while we're trying to abolish septic tanks in old neighborhoods through the sewer expansion program. We started this in the 1999 or 2000, and it has helped to keep the new ones from going in south of Well Line Road in Cantonment. And it's been a necessary part of the program to reduce the number of septic tanks. Without it, we'd probably never have gained anything through all the millions that we spent on sewer expansion. Is there a comment?
Yes, we do have 160,000 in the operating budget for septic tank abatement. We work through the Department of Health on that. They are going out and monitoring septic tanks and things like that. So that is in the operating budget, 160,000.
That's not very much, it seems to me.
That funds their program.
Do you know how much we spent on that last year?
The 160,000 is what we're contracted with them.
What we're contracted with the health department? Huh. And that's to help with
That
getting,
that helps them fund their program where they go out and inspect septic tanks, or they help with indigent septic tanks. That may not be the same program you're talking about.
that's not the original septic tank abatement program.
Okay.
Can
May I
anyone
ask Mr.
clarify?
Sorrell, how much do we have of developers doing new septic tank? I'm not aware of much.
Almost none.
Yeah.
Basically, if there's sewer available, we do not let them put in septic tanks.
I know that recently we had one down on Gulf Beach Highway. It's not in my district, it's in Lois's district, but they ran, lines underneath. I was down there looking at those the other day, and now they're putting $179,000 homes where there was nothing but mobile homes because the guy went in and put, septic underneath the road there, so.
Are we now requiring septic tanks regardless of the expense to the developer in the south end of the county? Or do we still have this policy of providing financial assistance to them if it exceeds a certain expense?
We do not have the ability to require septic tanks. I mean, that's a health department issue. They're the ones that permit septic tanks, inspect them, and so on. Our issue is whether we require them to hook up to the sewer system if one's available. And that's part of the program that you were just talking about, I believe. If they can install septic tanks, but sewer is available, if the health department allows them to install septic tanks, but sewer is available and we want them to put in sewer, there is a program that was approved by the board where we can accommodate them with that particular program. And I believe there's funds in the operating budget every year for that. So, but that doesn't happen very often because what we try to do is get the developers as part of any new development is it's their responsibility to put those in.
Well, when we started that program, it had nothing to do with replacing septic tanks with sewer connections. It was strictly a program to ensure that new development in the south end of the county would be on sewer rather than on septic tanks. And the county commission passed a resolution, I think it was, requiring all developers to come to ECUA and either sign up for sewer or get a waiver from ECUA to put in septic tanks. It was a very significant power that was given to us by the county commission as part of a major deal with the Home Builders Association and others too. It's sounding like we sort of lost track of that project and of that authority.
I'm just not sure,
I guess this is not the time to.
well, I'm not sure how much developers are allowing septic are putting in septic, I think is the issue.
Well,
It's kinda-
I'll not push that further. I think this is not really the time to go into that in great detail. So I'll just move along. On page 36, we're buying emergency generators this year. There's no money projected in the next 4 fiscal years for that purpose. Does that mean that in fiscal year 2020 we will complete the necessary purchase of emergency generators? Just curious.
Well, I think the answer to that's yes. I think that Jerry Piscopo runs that, and if he didn't put anything in there, I think the answer is yes. But to be honest with you, this program could change next year. We'll just see. But
Actually,
right now, I'm
at the
sorry.
top, it says 2020 to 2024.
It does,
Yes.
but what Dr. Walker's saying is that there's only 2 years that's shown
Oh, I
there.
got you.
So,
Only the
I got you.
prior year and the current,
you know,
and the
these,
next.
these requests change every year. Each director is required to look at those every year and put in what they need. And that's what came through this year because he needs this for generator replacement. And, $300,000 sounds like a lot of money, but it really isn't when you're buying generators. That's not very many.
No, in fact, I was wondering how many that would buy.
I don't know what size generators he needs. Some of them are small, they're 60 horsepower, and some of them are huge, they're 300-400 horsepower or more. I got to assume that these are the smaller ones that are some of the ones that he pulls around. So it's probably half a dozen, probably at the most.
But it's possible that we may not need to actually put much money in the budget over the next 4 years for that. Now, I think you said that, and if so, that's good.
As I recall, after Hurricane Ivan, we started aggressively purchasing generators for many years, for 10 or 15 years, very aggressively purchasing generators. So it may be that we're getting, we're getting to the point where we've got most of
Stocked
it covered.
up.
Of course, 15 years is a magic number when things start wearing out. On page 38, I would like to just point out that the second paragraph down at the bottom gives a very good summary of the corrective action plan. I haven't seen that label before, but I take it that that's the I&I plan things to be corrected over the next 10 years in our infrastructure, especially our sewer infrastructure. And I just wanted to mention that if you want to know what's involved in the I&I program, it seems to be all laid out quite well right there. Page 41. We need to plan to, it says, we need to plan to replace as many as 40 pumps per year. And we're budgeting about $250,000 a year. Will $250,000 a year get us 40 pumps per year?
Again, it depends on the size. It will get you as the smaller ones, yes, it certainly will. But that's not enough to cover one of the big pumps, like you've got at the big regional lift station downtown. And if you look here, I think there's money in here to replace those. And basically, those are big dollar pumps because of the size of them. The three of them are probably as big as this room, so they're huge. So yes, it'll do the minor pumps that we need replaced, but it won't do the big ones. They have to be individual requests.
Okay. On page 47. It says in the listing of years up at the top that we intend to spend $5,500,000 in fiscal year 2020 for, and then it says down below, for a study. I think that's probably incorrect. I think that should be 500,000. And that makes a difference of $5 million in the total, if that was actually added into the total. I also would point out that that just seems to be duplicative of page 57. Is it a simple unintended duplication, or is there something else that we need to know about? It looks to me as if page 57 is the correct information as far as scheduling of expenditures, and that 47 is not only duplicative but not correct. Could anybody help me on that?
Except the numbers are different up top. I think one is supposed to be the engineering and maybe one the construction. Can you look at, thank you, Patty.
Sure. On page 57 is the correct one, showing the 500,000 in fiscal 2020, and that's also listed in the CIP listing that you see on page 28. It shows the 500,000, and then the following year, they're looking to do the construction for $5 million. So page 57 is the correct one. Page 47 is not correct, and we will take that out.
Can be disregarded.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good catch, Dr. Walker.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, it was included originally, but we just couldn't fund it this year, and moreover, we even if we did the engineering, we couldn't do the construction, so we just pulled it at the last minute.
Thank you.
On page 49, valve location and maintenance. I think I've asked this question before recently, but are we still locating valves?
Yes, and we probably will be for a long time.
after 30
mean,
years?
Yes, a lot of the valves that we inherited have been paved over, and a lot of the valves have been relocated. It's just amazing some of the things that we're finding, but yes, we'll be locating valves probably long after you and I are gone.
Well, I remember a huge search for a valve back in my very first year on the board. Had a 12-inch water line just blowing up to high heaven, and nobody knew where the shut-off valve was. It took about 5 hours to find it. Well, certainly it's a good thing to be still looking for them. But it's sort of like buying the emergency generators. It'd be nice to come to a conclusion on that someday. One thing I'd like to mention is, as we look through these pages, we see page after page where there's a fixed amount for each year, in many cases, over all 5 years of the projected budget. Well, that's just simply good long-range maintenance, basically. And so it's really a great way, it's always a good thing to see that we're doing it that way. Page 55, what is a water system optimization effort?
Mr. Sorrell?
We have approximately 32 wells, and we have a very large system. We have a north zone and a south zone. If we can figure out how to run the pumps more effectively, we can save a tremendous amount of electricity. So basically what we're doing is we're evaluating the system to determine where the system demands are and what pumps we should run and when. So we're trying to optimize the electrical energy consumption, even chemical applications of various things like that. So we're always looking at ways to try to reduce either the electrical consumption or chemical costs and so on. That's what this is all about. That's a system that we're trying to look at how to optimize the use of the system, because it's just amazing the demands on the system. Sometimes we'll have to use the north zone to the south zone and vice versa. Sometimes we'll have to use different pumps, and there are ways that we can strategize in order to reduce the electrical consumption, because these pumps are huge and they use a lot of electricity.
Thank you. On page 58, there's an item for an investigation of effluent disposal capacity at the CWRF. What is it that is motivating us to worry about the disposal capacity of the CWRF?
Mr. Sorrell?
Right now, the CWRF is basically 100% industrial reuse with Gulf Power Plant, Chris, International Paper, and when they can't take all of the effluent, we'll even use spray fields, which is also an acceptable means of water reclamation. At times, Plant Crest is not using the water that they told us they would, and we have to find another means of disposal. So we're looking at that now, and that's what this study's all about. There's such thing as called an apricot permit. We're taking a look at that for disposal. We're looking at various other things to send more water to International Paper, or where we can dispose of this. Possibly, Gulf Power wants a gas main through our property, possibly to run a water reclamation main down to University of West Florida. We're trying to figure out alternatives, because the flow never stops coming to that plant, and the effluent disposal from that plant never stops. So that means that we always have to have a means for disposal. And if Plant Chris, for example, would shut down, it's gone. So we've got to find another means for disposal, and that's what this is about.
Is there something on the horizon that, such as a shutdown of Plant Crest, that we should be, that has us worried?
Well, I'm always worried about the shutdown of Plant Crest, possibly shutdown of International Paper. Plant Crest now is, well, for a while there was concern about them shutting it down completely and building a nuke. And I don't think that's going to happen, at least in any time in the near future. But what they are doing is try to convert that plant over to gas-fired system from coal. That's going to change the amount of water, reclaimed water that they're going to need for the cooling tower. So there's going to be a significant change coming in the not-too-distant future. So we want to be ready, and that's what this study's about.
And that's basically what information I wanted to hear. Finally, I'm sure you're all glad, on page 76, this is the budget item to add 2 additional loading docks and some covered storage at the MRF. How many truckloads are we shipping out daily? I ask because currently we're limited to approximately 10 loads, getting 10 loads per day loaded. And we can increase the capacity to 24. But given that so much that the recyclable markets are in such terrible shape right now, is this something that, an expansion that we really need to do at this time?
Mr. Sorrell?
Well, certainly, we're going to take a look at that with the changing conditions there, but essentially, we're pretty much bound right now. We can only ship out, 9 to 10 truckloads a day, and we're actually producing more than that. If you've been out there, you can see a lot of the materials stacked up on the loading dock, and a lot of the materials are stacked up inside. And we're actually having to take them out and put them outside until we can get a truck, and we've been loading trucks outside with a forklift type thing. So even though the materials are being stockpiled, we still have to have a means to move them around, to transport them, and so on. So we need the additional loading facilities to get it out of the MRF itself so that we can get the materials out of there. And we'll take a look at it and see, if we can incinerate everything, maybe we don't need this. But right now, it looks like we do, and we'll have to take a little further look.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, that concludes my comments and questions.
Thank you very much, sir. Very good questions and comments. Mr. Ponson?
One quick, back on that, on 55, the water system optimization, is that money, is that like outside engineering money? Is that internal, your staff money? How's that money spent for a project like that?
That'd be outside engineering money.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. Thank you for all those great questions. I had a whole list of questions, but a majority of them have been answered. We're not recycling in Santa Rosa, correct? Currently.
That's correct. They're not bringing us any recycling materials at this time.
Thank you. And if we were landfilling, that would add to our fees, correct?
Yes, ma'am. If we had to landfill everything, it would add significantly to our fees, because you're looking at, in Escambia, you're looking at $46 a ton right now, I believe, so it's very expensive.
So it would be more than $1.
Yes, ma'am.
And that we would also have to add back in 2 time a week pickup, correct?
Yes, ma'am. That's what Mr. Rudd's telling me. He wouldn't be able to do it with the existing system, so it would add additional costs.
Okay, thank you. And just so you know, Chuck, I'm going to go out tomorrow and watch this. And when Randy and I were down in Palm Beach County, they burn everything. They have a $60 million incinerator. They don't landfill. Well, they still have a landfill, for some items, but it's 90% reduced, and they incinerate everything. Now, we don't have $60 million. That's the reason we don't have that kind of plant. It would be nice to hit, maybe if we regionally talked, wink, wink, wink out there, with Panama City, looking at the incineration as well. That might be something that regionally, Mobile even, we're central to, even if you went across lines, for something like that in the future, I would love to see that. That's a magnificent plant. Just to go see it was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in sanitation. So it's not out of the realm that one day we might not be, you know, we might be burning more. It's just so expensive right now. So I'm really, when I saw that down there, I wondered, when are we gonna start seeing some smaller, trials like this? So it's really nice to see this one, and, I can't wait to go out there and check it out. I'm glad that DEP's on site, cause that'd be my first question is, are we, what's going into the air? And then the last thing was, the customer service. I'm sorry that Gabe's not here, and I'm sorry that John Dane's not here, because the savings that the difference that we've seen with this new equipment, and I'm really, really sorry that Dr. McCorvey's not here, because that was one thing he really pushed for, and it's really cool to see that now. You know, I don't get the problems about call wait anymore. I haven't had one since we started that new program, so I really hate that Dr. McCorvey's not here to hear that. All right, maybe he is here. That's all I have to say.
Can I ask? a
Yes,
question?
ma'am.
What type of filters do they have for the emissions on that big incinerator you speak of? Do you know? I mean, I'm sure they have some sort of filter.
I don't think there's any filters at
there's
all,
any.
that I understand it. The way it is the way I understand it, it takes the fumes and actually takes them back through the burning process and
Wow.
reburns them.
Yeah.
So I've got some pictures of the unit that I can show each of you, but we probably ought to do it while you're in session, because I don't want to violate any sunshine laws and have somebody say something about
Yeah.
one of the pictures if we go out of
Sure.
session.
If you will, pass that around.
I can't, it's on my phone, but,
Oh,
but I can let you see what I have. If you want to take just a 2-minute break, I can show you what I have. It's nothing fabulous, but it's something to see.
it is something to see, though.
Well, let
because
me, I can walk up and down here and show
Okay.
each of you while you're in session, so you'll see what it looks like.
But that is,
Maybe we could ship our stuff down there to be
No.
incinerated.
oh, I don't know about the cost for that, but I do see it as a possible regional solution in the future. But I think that technology's probably gonna get so much cheaper. There's already someone here, with the county talking about, incineration.
Can I ask you,
Yes, please.
I saw on social media this huge fish sculpture on the beach, and people
Yeah.
put their plastic bags and plastic stuff in that, and it just creates like a piece of art sculpture.
Yeah,
Because there has to be a way to recycle our stuff. The international president of Toastmasters takes plastics and makes backpacks for students. Like, there's different ways to recycle rather than
oh,
try
yeah.
to sell it.
So that's what I think people do with our commodities. I bought a new system in my backyard, you know, picnic table and chairs, and it's made out of recycled milk bottles. It's supposed to last 25 years, probably longer than me, but it'd be nice to know if it does. But it cleans very well. You can just clean it with bleach.
Madam Chairman,
Yes, sir.
may I speak?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I would also remind everybody that we have in the past toyed with the idea of a system of converting garbage to combustible materials, which could then be used to fuel the drying of sludge at our CWRF or other possibilities. That apparently that hasn't ever come very close to feasibility, but it is another alternative that we know exist in theory at least, and we could possibly have such a facility someday. I think we need to remember how creative and forward-thinking our sanitation program has been with Mr. Sorrell and Mr. Rudd and others, and that I don't think anybody else in our region is going to jump into the leadership on any big thing like that. I think it will be ECUA if it's done, whatever big things we do, such as this incinerator. And I think we should, be willing to continue to move forward and take the leadership.
Thank you. Mr. Perkins?
When I was a kid, I lived in a northeastern state, and they had these great big giant chimneys that poured out smoke all the time. And even down at ECUA, at the old Main Street treatment plant, they used to have a big smokestack where they burned the sludge and everything. And so, when we started talking about incinerating, I hope we don't set off all the global warming people, and I hope we don't, alarm everybody. If we're going to talk about, and this right now it's a pilot project, and we're going to look at it for a couple of weeks, and DEP's looking at it with us, and we're not going to be spewing stuff into the air. But when I think of incinerators, I think of when I was a kid and those big chimneys pouring out smoke, And so I want to make sure that, it's a good point. So I want to make sure that public relations wise, if we are looking at it, we let people know that, and show them the pictures and the technology, and that it's being recycled, and that it's not having emissions, because I don't want us to alarm the community and think that, ECUA is going to be, pouring out a bunch of emissions now trying to get rid of the recyclables. Just so
Thank
we're
you.
aware of that.
Thank you. Dr. Walker?
That's why I'm thrilled that FDEP is going to be on the site within this 2-week period, testing period. I think that gives us a lot of protective cover.
Thank you. Mr. Kimball?
If we wanted to, if we magically could make the money appear, I mean, could we do incinerating? I mean, or I know that there's rules with the county as far as with the landfill and all that jazz with, having to dump. Could they, I guess, would they try to stop us? Because obviously then tipping fees would be less if you weren't dumping a whole bunch of trash there.
Thank you, Mr. Sorrell.
No, I think the county would be a proud participant because, like I told you, the C&D materials, they don't have any place for it. They'd love to give us that, and they'd love to give us they've been trying to get us to take drywall forever, and we don't really have any way to dispose of that. So I think they'd be a proud participant, and your answer is yes, we could certainly do the incineration. Instead of $60 million, ours is $600,000, so it's a lot smaller, but I'm not willing to recommend anything at this point until we see how it works and until I can do the evaluation, see if there's a return on investment and so on and so forth. But it's new technology. If you're interested, you ought to go look at it. Don't get near it because it's probably pretty hot. And there is a hose out there, but basically it seems to be working well. At least that's the report I got this morning before this meeting.
Yep. That plant down in Palm Beach had 0 emissions, and you could actually walk up and look through a little window and see it burning. So it was quite a sight to see, but again, $60 million. So do we have anyone wanting to make a motion? Dr. Walker?
I have a comment about the county attitude. 10 years ago, the county was fighting us tooth and toenail about everything that we strove to do, such as a MRF, because they didn't want to lose revenue at the landfill. I take it that the county has, it sounds to me as from this discussion, some of the things Mr. Sorrell has said, that the county has now a totally different attitude about it and is more interested in limiting tonnage going into the landfill than in maximizing it. Could anyone comment on, anyone know more about that and could comment?
Mr. Sorrell?
I don't think the county's interested in limiting the tonnage. They're interested in controlling the type of tonnage that they get, because there are materials that do not do very well in landfills, like C&D materials, drywall, various other materials like that, and they would like to restrict those. But they have plenty of tonnage. They would also like to find a way to dispose of some of these materials, I think, to help the overall county. So that's why I think they'd be a participant. But I think they also have tremendous costs associated with expanding the landfill. So I think they're trying to minimize that. Clearly, they're using it as a cash cow for other operations. But if they have to expand the landfill into other cells, I mean, you're talking a lot of money. So they're looking at it the same way we would. They're looking at their investment and the return and so on and so forth. So they're just trying to control the input.
One other question. Is the county now mining some of its old sales?
Mr. Sorrell?
They were, and I don't know if that's still ongoing or not, but they were doing some mining out there, and you know, they were convinced there was value in that. I was never convinced of that, but I think that operation may have ceased, but I'm not really sure.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments? Mr. Kimball?
No, but I'll go ahead and, if we need a motion for this, I would make a motion that we approve that, or no, I don't know.
Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
I'll make a motion that we approve the staff recommendation for both budgets.
I would second that.
Any further comment, Mr. Ponson? No? If not, please vote. And it passes 9-0. Thank you very much, and thank you, staff, for all of your hard work. I would move now to unfinished business, and I'm going to be quick on my, I'm sorry, informational reports, page 78. Any questions or comments? If not, we move to unfinished business. I'm going to be very brief because I think what we might do is put this back to staff. Ms. Benson brought up back in November a program to return deposits for good paying customers. And, you know, I like to research things before I, get into liking them or not liking them. And so I've spent a little bit of time researching this when I talked to Patty, and they are used, those deposits are kept in restricted funds. They're not in money that we can use. I didn't realize that sometimes they're up to like $20,000 for a deposit of 5, 6, 7. For a large firm, they could go on up there, and that's money that they can't use, in their budget that year for a business. So I want to look at this again and get staff to look at it, and I don't want to do anything that would badly or poorly hurt us. So I want to return it to staff to look at, because I don't know how many people would even ask for a deposit back after 36 months. But if somebody has paid their bill on time for 36 months, I don't know, I want to find out if legally we can even say they have to be a property owner, because if they're not a property owner, then we have no way to lien them. So I don't know if legally, so that's something we would have to talk about legal-wise. So I don't want to ask you to approve anything today, but I would like staff to relook at it. And Patty and I have talked about it, and to relook at returning deposits after something like, and we can toss it around, after 36 months of good pay. I think Ms. Benson added, but I don't know that I would want it to be just commercial. Government's always good at penalizing, but the ECUA has always been good at, if you're a good recycler, you get a recycle. If you're good with the FOG program, then you get an award. And I'm not so sure that I wouldn't want to give deposits back after 36 months if someone was a good payer. It would. So, pardon me?
Give it back in increments, maybe? I don't know, you'd have to
It's
look
just-
at different options of ways to give it back.
You know, I'm open for anything. Mr. Ponson?
Is it possible to do that with, maybe reduce it to a letter of credit where, you know, we did that with a developer recently, a letter of credit, you know, and so maybe these big businesses can do that.
Letter of credit's an option, but I don't know if it's, if it ties up their money. You know, I would be okay tying up somebody's money $1,000, but when you're getting up into the thousands, the 10 and 15 and 20,000 for somebody that's paid really well for 36 months, you know, maybe give it back over 36 months. I don't know, but
So I guess my question to ask the staff would be like, how often have we had to claim that deposit on a bigger commercial one, you know?
very good, good. And what's the likelihood of,
Yeah, 'cause
and if you staggered it out, it's not gonna be like they're gonna be asking for it every year.
Right.
Chances are they might not even ask for it. Maybe someone would like to make a motion to refer it to staff.
Sure, I'll make that motion that staff explore that and get back to us.
Thank you, Mr. Kimball.
I'll second.
Thank you. Thank you. Patty heard us loud and clear. That's it on that. We move now to new business, the elimination of plastic bags, and I believe that is you, Dr. Walker.
Yes, I delay that till next month if you don't mind.
Thank you. And we move now to open forum. I have no pink slips. If nothing further, we are adjourned.